Footage taken by a drone for the Chula Vista Police Department. These unmanned aerial vehicles are used daily to respond to all sorts of calls, like this one, where a man was spotted with what was reported to be a gun, turned out to be a cigarette lighter. Our political anchor Alex Cohen spoke with Pepperdine University's Gregory McNeal about the roles that drones can play in law enforcement. He began by explaining the federal rules around this technology.
For a long time, really the FAA's regulations around this were about safety. So that was their key consideration. So the thing that police officers mostly did was they took drones, they put them in the back of their police car, and they operated them like remote controlled aircraft. They said, okay, I need to look over that fence. They'd open up the trunk, they'd pop this little remote control aircraft out. They'd look, they'd fly it over the fence and they'd take a look. The rules have evolved a little bit recently to now allow the police to basically deploy a drone a really long distance to get blocks away or to the other side of town. And that's now enabled a whole new set of capabilities to allow the police to see things pretty far away when the police are not even on the scene.
Yeah.
And that's where we get this new sort of concern around surveillance, but now also a new public safety tool in the hands of law enforcement.
Yes, pros and cons as there are with so many things. I was kind of surprised to learn that Chula Vista down in the San Diego region was like the first American city to actually obtain authorization from the FAA to use drones for surveillance. How do they manage to do that? And how many other Southern California cities have kind of followed suit in their wake?
Yeah, I've been in this business for a long time. I founded a drone company back in 2015, and I remember running into the folks from Chula Vista, and they were really forward leaning on this all the way back then, I guess 8 years ago now. And the folks at Santa Monica Police Department were not that far behind. And they just decided, both departments, that they wanted to get in front of this. And the initial reasons that they decided to use the drones were mostly for crowd control after beaches were letting out. They decided to put a drone up and just follow where the traffic was going and say, hey, let's redirect traffic down one roadway or another after concerts on the beach in Santa Monica, for example. And so they had to start to develop programs because in 2015, people were very concerned, oh my gosh, this is military technology and whatnot. So they developed programs and policies and procedures around it. And then they became the leaders across the country for responsible usage because they didn't want there to be protests that would pull it away. Because in other places in the country, you saw people who were being law enforcement was being a little bit too forward leaning in a way where people might say, why are you using the tool in that way? And so these were two departments that were being a little bit more careful and transparent in the way in which they were using the drones.
Okay, so you just mentioned maybe redirecting traffic after everyone's leaving the beach. What are some of the other positive ways in which one might use a drone to help, conduct law enforcement operations?
Yeah, a few different examples. So we've heard about a few examples where it might be a search and rescue mission. So 911 call comes in and you're looking for a lost person. Maybe like we all get those Amber alerts on our phone, an elderly person is missing. So there have been some examples where law enforcement has sent out a search party to look for someone. Maybe they're lost in a field. Or like when we have LA County sheriffs looking for someone in one of the canyons, hikers on a hot day like today where it's 100 degrees or whatever. And instead they can send the drone out, cover a lot more territory, find someone in a circumstance like that. So no real law enforcement triggers, no privacy concerns that get triggered in that circumstance, just adding an extra set of eyes, covering a lot more territory. So that's a potential beneficial use.
And it sounds like, too, the fact that drones, they're not human. If something happens to them, if someone shoots or whatever, they'll be okay, unlike human officers. And one example of a drone that was able to see what officers initially thought a man holding a weapon, it turned out to be a lighter, right? And the drone was able to see that. Is that, you feel like, a compelling argument for using drones, is that if something gets violent, they'll be okay, they're machine.
I really like that use case that you brought up. Back in 2013, I wrote a piece at Forbes about this, where the idea of taking a person and pulling them back from a dangerous situation gives us time to think about what's going on, right? So police officers are just like any other human, whether it's on the battlefield or whether it's in a law enforcement circumstance. And if we can pull them back from a potentially dangerous situation, keep the weapon holstered, and allow them to take a look at what's happening and slow that decision cycle, and then it turns out it's a kid with an airsoft gun, or it's a person who's taking their wallet out, or it's a person who just has a lighter. Every one of these are real world examples, right? From Tamir Rice to kids with BB guns recently, to people who have pulled wallets. Every one of those are real world examples of people who have been shot inadvertently by police. If we can substitute a drone in and prevent that from happening, that's a positive development I think we can all agree with.
And yet there are concerns. What are some of the biggest concerns that you have about using drones in this way?
Right. So every example that I've talked about here is a single use example, right? The police send it to a 911 call. They take it out of a trunk and they look. The place where it gets bad is, and where the courts have had a problem with this, is an example in where aircraft were used, like manned aircraft, not drones, but you can see drones being used for this, for what's known as wide area surveillance. So this was in Baltimore, where the Baltimore Police Department flew planes basically 24 hours a day, recording everything on the ground that was going on in the city of Baltimore. And then at any point in time, they could basically just rewind the tape. So there's Alex. She left home, stopped at Starbucks, stopped and picked up a bagel somewhere, headed down to, the office, and then rewind that tape and see everywhere you went along the way. That becomes a very big sort of big brother type of thing when we can track every single person's movements. And the court becomes very concerned with that. And I think all of us would be concerned with that type of all-knowing surveillance.
Yeah. I think there's concerns too about then what happens with this footage, and there's so much of it, and where does it go, and when do you delete it, and things of that nature. I understand there's been some question about whether or not video produced by drones should be subject to the California Public Records Act. What can you tell us about that?
This is a difficult one because on the one hand, you think government is involved in a public activity, therefore what they do should be a public record, right? So that's my initial instinct. I want to hold government accountable. But then on the other side, I don't know that I want everything that the police did when they were recorded using one of these devices to be available to anyone, right? So one of the things that instead of relying on courts to do this, we might want is our legislatures, whether it's the city of Santa Monica municipal government or a county council or the state legislature, to put some rules around when can these be disclosed and under what circumstances. Right now, it's being fought out in court about whether or not this is subject to open records requests, but this is something that the state legislature should probably take up.
It is a wild and fascinating future. I am so glad that you came by to break it all down for us. Greg McNeal, thank you so much.
Good to see you again.